The sea was deceptively calm that morning, a slate-gray expanse under a sky just bright enough to promise trouble. HMS Queen Elizabeth, the pride of the Royal Navy, cut through the waters of the English Channel with deliberate authority. From the bridge, Captain Mark Allen stared out at the open horizon, his hands behind his back and a stillness about him that masked years of operational experience. Despite the apparent quiet, his instincts told him that something wasn't right. That instinct had saved him before, and he had learned never to ignore it. The Channel had become a chessboard lately, one where major powers made their moves not with declarations, but with steel hulls and encrypted signals. To the untrained eye, the formation of ships surrounding the aircraft carrier might have seemed routine. But Lieutenant Sophie Hayes, stationed in the Combat Information Center below deck, knew better. She leaned forward, brow furrowed, as fresh radar echoes confirmed what she suspected: uninvited company. "They're not just observing," she muttered, eyes flicking between data readouts and live satellite feeds. "They're positioning." Brody, the ship's senior sonar technician, scoffed from the opposite console. "Of course they are. Welcome to the 21st century welcome parade." His voice carried that seasoned sailor sarcasm, but there was a flicker of concern in his tone. He'd been at sea for years, and this didn't feel like the usual posturing. The HMS Queen Elizabeth wasn't alone. A Dutch frigate and a U.S. destroyer flanked her at a respectful distance, each bristling with sensors and systems designed for modern threats. Yet none of that changed the fact that two unfamiliar warships, one Russian, one Chinese, were trailing the formation at less than 20 nautical miles, close enough to make a statement, too close to ignore. Aboard the bridge, a low beep drew Captain Allen's attention. The tactical display confirmed a slight change in bearing from the Russian vessel. Nothing overt, but subtle, like a player shifting a rook diagonally on the board, hoping you wouldn't notice. "Report," Allen said calmly. "Russian destroyer Admiral Tribbitt's altering course 3 degrees starboard," responded the officer of the watch. "Chinese Type 815 remains steady." Allen nodded once. "Maintain current course. Alert the task group. Secure all drones and prepare an unarmed flyover. I want our presence felt without provocation." It was a balancing act, this game they played. Push too hard, and headlines the next day would scream about near war in one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. Don't push at all, and those headlines would say the Royal Navy backed down in its own waters. Below, Lieutenant Hayes tapped into the encrypted comms stream, catching fragments of conversations from Allied ships. Dutch officers noted the change in Chinese engine resonance. The American destroyer's captain requested permission to deploy a drone, a move that could either ease tensions or snap the cord completely. Hayes ran a quick diagnostic, ensuring their own counter-surveillance systems were clean. "They're probing us," she said softly. "Trying to map our response time, sensor capabilities, EM shielding." Brody turned toward her. "And if they figure it out?" She didn't answer, because the truth was they couldn't afford to let the Chinese or Russians gather too much. Not when the Queen Elizabeth's combat systems were among the most advanced in NATO's arsenal. Meanwhile, on the flight deck, jet crews performed routine checks on F-35B fighters, unaware of the granular tensions unraveling below. The hum of readiness always lingered on the carrier, even when there was no imminent threat. That readiness wasn't a matter of protocol. It was the difference between controlled deterrence and spiraling chaos. Petty Officer Brody stepped out from the CIC briefly, walking along the narrow hallway leading toward the mess deck. He could feel it in the air, that strange stillness before something snapped. It reminded him of a past patrol in the Black Sea, when a misread radar return nearly triggered a defensive missile launch. No one wanted a repeat of that. No one sane, anyway. Upstairs, the captain studied the plot again. "How close are they willing to come?" he asked, mostly to himself. It was a question without an answer. The real puzzle wasn't the ships or their proximity. It was what they hoped to gain by doing this now. The Channel was not a typical theater for such aggression, not from both Russian and Chinese forces at once. The symbolic power of encircling Britain's flagship carrier in its own maritime backyard was not lost on Allen. They wanted to make a point about reach, influence, and resolve. But so did he. He picked up the internal phone. "Launch an unarmed Merlin," he said. "Keep it at 300 feet, a visible arc around their lead vessel. No approaches within 5 nautical miles. Let's see who flinches." The orders were relayed, and moments later the distinct sound of rotor blades thumped overhead. The helicopter lifted smoothly, banking wide, sweeping a deliberate arc across the sea. Cameras rolled, sensors scanned. Everyone watched. As the Merlin arced closer to the Russian destroyer, there was movement. Slow, calculated, but the ship held position. No weapons trained, no evasion, just silence. The Chinese vessel, however, made a curious shift. Its rear-facing radar dome tilted slightly, aligning with the aircraft. "Lock confirmed," Hayes said in a low voice. "They're tracking." Allen's voice was level. "Maintain flight pattern. They'll blink first." For several minutes, nothing changed. The chopper maintained altitude and speed. The foreign vessels held their breath, figuratively. On board, the crew of HMS Queen Elizabeth did not. Every system was live, every officer alert. And then, almost imperceptibly, the Russian ship veered to port, breaking formation. The Chinese vessel followed half a mile later, falling behind by 2 knots. Not a retreat, but a statement that they'd come close enough, for now. Back in the CIC, Hayes let out the breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Brody gave a dry chuckle. Guess they didn't like the view. Captain Allen remained silent as he watched the new plot update. The carrier group was intact. The message had been delivered. But he knew this was just the beginning. The rules of engagement hadn't changed. Only the board had. And somewhere beyond the horizon, he knew, new pieces were already being set in place. The next morning, gray light filtered through low cloud cover, casting a dull sheen over the English Channel. The Queen Elizabeth moved steadily eastward, her course adjusted slightly to avoid dense commercial traffic. But it wasn't tankers or ferries the Royal Navy was worried about today. It was the unknown, cloaked intentions behind well-painted hulls and silent, methodical maneuvers. In the Combat Information Center, Lieutenant Sophie Hayes hadn't slept. Coffee in hand, eyes red from the artificial glow of the monitors, she tracked new contact signatures blinking onto her console. "We've got shadow trails," she announced, her voice flat but alert. "New vessels, unregistered AIS. Too clean. Running dark." Captain Allen, freshly briefed and now in CIC himself, scanned the display. 3 more dots had appeared during the night, 2 Chinese and 1 Russian. None had pinged civilian transponders. None responded to hails. All maintained a loose formation just outside NATO-recognized buffer zones. "Are they closing?" Allen asked. "No, sir," Hayes replied. "They're holding a parallel heading." Monitoring Allen nodded slowly. "Then we do the same." But that wasn't enough. The Royal Navy didn't tolerate being watched passively while doing nothing. And this wasn't passive. This was surveillance, tracking patterns, mapping response times, understanding fleet posture. On the flight deck, engineers prepped a pair of F-35Bs for a scheduled drill. Commander Richard Lane, the ship's air wing boss, strode between the aircraft, barking checks and calling out mechanics who missed even minor discrepancies. Lane had served across multiple deployments, but he knew this one was different. The scrutiny was higher, the risk sharper, and every bolt, every panel had to hold under pressure, not just from wind and sea, but from eyes far beyond. "Launch in 15, Lane said into his headset. "Make it sharp." Below, in the heart of the operations room, the mood was a strange mix of tense professionalism and routine detachment. The ship's doctor walked the corridor past Hayes with a quick nod. Sailors ate in the mess and laughed softly. Somewhere, a radio played a song from the 80s. Life continued because it had to, but all of it hung beneath the surface of a fragile equilibrium. The American destroyer in the group, USS Porter, signaled intent to deploy a reconnaissance drone toward the trailing vessels. A request was made through the chain, and within minutes, the drone lifted silently into the air, spiraling to altitude like a hawk searching for prey. Hayes tracked its telemetry in real time. Drone up, heading 145, sensors active, no jamming so far. They'll try, Brody muttered beside her, or they'll record everything. The drone swept east, its high-resolution optics capturing the exact configuration of one of the Chinese Type 055 destroyers. Satellite imagery couldn't reveal what this little machine could. A human figure appeared on deck, then another, both in standard plan uniforms. No hostile action, but no acknowledgement either. Then, just as Hayes predicted, a burst of electromagnetic static lit up the screen. "Signal degradation," she said. "They're spoofing. Low-grade interference." Allen leaned in. "Can we maintain control?" "For now. If they scale it, we'll lose feed." He paused, then gave the order. "Pull it back. No need to test them. Yet." The drone banked westward, its data dump already uploading to naval intelligence servers. It was a small operation, but a quiet win. They'd learned what they needed to. More importantly, the others had shown their cards. The jamming, even restrained, was still an escalation. Back in the CIC, the tension rose again when another blip appeared. This one closer. A fishing vessel it claimed to be. But Hayes's gut told her otherwise. The vessel was moving too fast for a trawler, and its track, intermittent, jumpy, suggested intentional masking. She ran a passive scan. No net signature, no mechanical drag, no radio chatter. "It's a ghost," she said. Allen stepped forward. "Deploy a fast boat. I want a visual confirmation." Within 10 minutes, a Royal Navy RHIB launched from the Queen Elizabeth's port side, slicing through choppy waves toward the suspicious vessel. Aboard were 6 sailors, armed, alert, and trained for boarding operations. The crew watched from the rails as the small boat closed the distance. The fishing vessel didn't flee. But as the RHIB approached, its crew could be seen rapidly covering equipment with tarps and ducking below deck. The boarding team radioed back. "Unmarked electronics on deck, high-gain antenna partially retracted. This is no fishing boat." They had their proof. Allen's eyes narrowed. "Advise them to prepare for inspection. If they refuse, return and tag their location for intelligence retrieval." Predictably, the vessel's crew waved them off, pointing to a flag no one recognized, likely a registry of convenience. Within minutes, it reversed course and began retreating eastward, toward the Chinese formation. No one chased it. That would have crossed a line. But the message was clear. Back on the bridge, Allen addressed the team. "They're probing with more than just warships now. Civilian camouflage, spoofed signals. This is a coordinated surveillance net, and we're in the middle." "What do we do?" Hayes asked quietly. Allen turned to her, his voice calm. "We stay visible. We stay professional. But we don't give them a single opening." As the sky darkened and the channel swelled with the tide, the ship sailed on, silent, precise, and surrounded by watchers whose motives were becoming more brazen. The chessboard was now fully populated, but the next move had yet to be played. The following morning, the weather turned rough. Waves slammed against the hull of the Queen Elizabeth, and the wind howled across the flight deck in unpredictable gusts. Yet the carrier pressed on, her radar arrays sweeping the horizon, her command crew sharpened by the standoff from the day before. The tension on board hadn't eased. It had evolved, calcified into something colder, more deliberate. The threat hadn't vanished. It had simply gone quiet. Lieutenant Sophie Hayes returned to CIC before sunrise. The coffee was stronger than yesterday, but her nerves didn't notice. On the main display, the foreign ships were still there, now 5 in total. Chinese and Russian vessels were working together, loosely flanking the carrier group as it moved toward international shipping lanes. None had breached protocol, but none had left either. It was a pressure campaign, plain and simple. Captain Allen walked in moments later, scanning the situation report. "They're shadowing us tighter. Less than 8 nautical miles now." Hayes nodded. "And they're coordinating, changing speed and bearing together. Patterned, not reactive." Allen said nothing for a moment. His eyes drifted to the status feed of the HMS Diamond, the Royal Navy's escort destroyer. "I want her moved up. Between us and the closest of theirs, passive sonar on full." The orders were relayed instantly, and the Diamond adjusted her formation. A subtle message: "We see you, and we're not folding." Meanwhile, beneath the decks, the carrier's marine detachment was gearing up. Officially, it was a drill, a routine security readiness exercise. But the looks exchanged between the Marines and the command staff said otherwise. They were preparing for anything. Unlikely didn't mean impossible, and no one on the Queen Elizabeth was willing to bet lives on a miscalculation. Commander Lane, still on flight deck duty, checked the readiness of the F-35Bs again. "Fuel topped, munitions loaded. We can scramble if needed, but I don't like flying blind out here with them circling." "I know," Allen said, arriving at the deck to observe. "But we don't blink first, and we don't escalate." Back in CIC, Hayes noticed something different on the passive scans. A faint signal, short, rhythmic pings, too weak to be sonar, too steady to be natural. "Unknown contact," she said. "Underwater, no signature match." Submarine? The room tensed instantly. If it was a sub, it was dangerously close, and either exceptionally quiet or recently arrived. "We have a sonar buoy grid still active near our stern," Hayes added. "Pings match the pattern in that area." Allen made the call without hesitation. "Launch Seafox. Get eyes on it." The Seafox, a remote underwater drone, was deployed within minutes, slipping beneath the surface and steering toward the sonar anomaly. The feed flickered at first, then stabilized as the drone locked onto its target. There it was, a small cylindrical device anchored to the seabed. No propulsion system, not a mine, not a torpedo. It was a listening device, planted days earlier, maybe weeks, probably by one of the same vessels now shadowing them. "They've wired the channel," Hayes said. "They're not just watching, they're recording everything." The Seafox detonated on command, and the feed went dark. In the operations room, no one cheered. It wasn't a victory, it was confirmation. The surveillance net was deeper than anyone had thought. Allen looked over the silent room. "That device wasn't placed yesterday. It was already here. This isn't harassment. It's premeditated and coordinated." A beat passed. Hayes looked up at him. "Sir, if they've planted one, there could be more." "There are," Allen said, "but they won't get near this carrier." By afternoon, the sea had calmed. The Russian cruiser, nearest now, shifted slightly and began to fall back, drifting slowly toward the southern perimeter of the formation. Then one of the Chinese destroyers mirrored the move. Not a retreat, but a repositioning. Hayes noticed it immediately. "They're regrouping, pulling into a new formation, away from our beam toward our aft quarter." Allen frowned. "Are they clearing space or setting it?" The answer came 5 minutes later. From the north, a civilian-registered aircraft buzzed the carrier's airspace at an illegal altitude. An unmarked drone, likely Chinese, veered within 500 meters of the Queen Elizabeth before turning sharply east. Commander Lane watched it from the flight deck, teeth clenched. "They're testing reaction times, flight paths," Defense thresholds. They were drawing a map of the ship's entire response system in real time, poking every nerve ending to see which one twitched. This time, Allen acted. Launch an F-35, armed, visual patrol only. Make sure they see it. Lane didn't hesitate. The roar of the jet filled the sky moments later, climbing vertically before banking hard toward the drone's last known position. The message was immediate. Within 20 minutes, 3 of the shadowing ships reversed course. Subtly, calmly, like it was all part of a plan. They weren't fleeing. They were satisfied. Their data collected. Back in CIC, Hayes watched the blips disperse. They're done. Allen stood with arms crossed. For now, they got what they wanted, but we got what we needed too. That night, the ship settled into a quieter rhythm. Patrols remained vigilant, but the radar feeds showed empty water again. The sky had cleared, and moonlight shimmered off the waves. In her bunk, Hayes stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The game had changed. They weren't just defending the sea anymore. They were defending a boundary no longer marked by distance but by decisions. Silent probes, drones, shadow vessels. Every moment carried weight. And the next encounter, everyone knew, would come faster than the last.